Hey, Corona TV viewers, this is Peter Keys from Leonard Skinner. I want to wish y'all a happy birthday.
First of all, let's just do the elbow bump because we can't do the handshake right now.
Hello, everybody on Corona TV. This is Macy Gray.
You're smiling, and I saw your beautiful daughter earlier, who I said could come on the show anytime. Welcome, Shiv Singh.
Thanks for having me, Joseph. Great to be with you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Corona TV. It is Friday, May 1st. Happy May. I'm actually quoting the day, the date, the year, because you know what? It's a new month, and a new month brings new possibilities and new hope. And April flowers bring May. No, wait. April showers bring May flowers. I knew it was in there somewhere. So let's hope we have lots of flowers. I better take the live. You see the Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn live thing. Let's take it off because behind you is one of the cartoons from the Marketoonist. Not just one of the cartoons, but a very special one for me because it is in my book, In Built to Suck. There you go. I paid, what was it? I think $1 billion for the cartoon. And it was worth every single penny. I love it, right? Instead of risking anything new, let's play it safe by continuing our slow decline into obsolescence. Something about Tom, he really manages to just get to the, expose the nerve and get to the root of the problem. And his commentary on marketing, the state of marketing, even business, has just been fantastic. So I'm excited to have him on the show, and I'll bring him on soon enough. I hope you guys are well. I'm excited to tell you about what's been going on in my life, in the world, etc. But you know, obviously we have Tom. That's his real headshot. If you guys were wondering how he looks, that's exactly how he looks in real life. Yesterday I gave you a sense of next week's interviews. We've got Jamie Mo Crazy, Jason Borowitz, Bob Norp, Marcus Sheridan, and Joe Delagrave. And then on Sunday, real treat in the Entrepreneur Corner. I still haven't corrected it. Not Johan, but John Sinai. And John is one of South Africa's preeminent thought leaders, visionaries, futurists. This guy is just super, super dynamic. I probably am just going to let him talk. And I'll go and do something. It's going to be a beautiful day here in Westport over the weekend. I think Sunday it's going to be about 72. So maybe I'll just go like live by the pool and let John talk to you and answer some of your questions. Maybe, or maybe I'll figure out a couple of things to discuss with him. So we have got a bunch of birthdays, a lot of birthdays. Let's celebrate them. Let's celebrate Tomer, best tour guide in the world in Israel. Ron, Robert Swartz, Lisa, Chad, Eric, Paul, Denise, Jeff, Ali, not Ali. How are you doing, Ali? Bill, Jason, Nathaniel, and Achille. Hopefully he is not anyone's heel. Sorry, terrible joke, whatever. But happy birthday to all of you. Remember, you will never, ever celebrate alone as long as I'm doing Corona TV. Now let's briefly look at the numbers, we obviously are now 3 days over the 1 million US cases, 63,000 deaths, unfortunately, and yeah, the numbers are the numbers. They're continuing to increase in terms of absolute numbers, right? And relatively, we seem to be stuck, right? We seem to be plateauing. So. Hopefully we will all see this and share this and experience this together when they start to decline and we can see consistent days of decline. We know that the federal guidelines here in the US are meant to see, I think it's 14 days of declines, but I think, you know, we have almost half the states open at the moment. So let's just hope that history will prove all of us right, that we made the right moves at the right time for the right reasons, and hopefully ending up with the right results. Now, yesterday I said to you that I was going to take you through the survival planning canvas. And I'm going to do that, very briefly, so you get a sense of what that canvas looks like for Brand USA. But before I do it, just a couple of hellos to our regulars, to Joey DeMont, hello, Bob Farnham, get used to elbow bumping. He always gives us a hashtag of the day. And Crystal is here as well. How are you, Crystal? I'm sure we'll see Bob and Crystal and Joey in our Zoom after show, after party today. If you guys would like to join, all you have to do is type in bit.ly/CoronaTV after show, and you'll be in the Zoom room afterwards with myself, with Tom, and we're there we should be there for about 30 minutes. It's generally a little bit less because I end up talking too much, which I always do, and have such amazing conversations with my guests. And I'm sure I'm going to be having one of those amazing conversations. So, let's get into it. This is the canvas. It's a canvas that I created for brands. I've done it for magazines. I've done it for trade associations. I've done it for startups, and I've done it for corporations as well. In order for you to be able to see it properly, I'm going to zoom in on the 4 quadrants. So at the top left-hand side of the canvas, and by the way, if you want to download this canvas for yourself, you can just go to builttosuck.com, which is the official website of my book, and just look on bonus content, and you'll be able to download the startup one and the corporate one free. So fill it out for yourself, and if you want to send it in for Brand USA, I'll share it on future episodes, or even for your own brand. So we start off with headwinds and tailwinds, and this really is just your basic SWOT analysis, right? Headwinds, things that are basically pushing you back or holding you back. Tailwinds that are propelling you forward. And why did I write a piece about the death of America? Why did I talk about my hypothesis that America was no longer a superpower? Simply because there are a lot of headwinds, and when you go through these headwinds, partisan politics, divisiveness, fake news, mainstream media disintermediation, I had to cram all of that onto one line, but that probably could take up an entire quadrant. Income equality, inability for us to take care of and offer basic fundamental needs like healthcare, and then this global superiority complex, this idea that we are the best, but the world outside doesn't see us that way. And then we've got tailwinds, and there are a lot of great tailwinds too, right? The American dream, the white picket fence, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere in New York City. But the fact that people come here, people are still attracted to this country because they believe in the American dream. Very strong culture, very strong patriotism, and almost the antithesis to the global superiority complex is the blinkered perception of greatness, the reality distortion field. Sometimes you need that. If you don't believe you're great, then why do you expect anybody else to? And then other things like still the world's economic powerhouse, the capital of the world, the financial capital of the world, the media capital of the world, the technology capital of the world in Silicon Valley. Now on the top right, you have values. And these values, I just played around with these 4. I won't go into the methodology today, but I came up with loyalty, optimism, imagination, and redemption. They're meant to be values that are differentiated. They're meant to be values that really kind of, are part of every person in America, but also the brand itself. And we always have to say, are we being true to those values? Are we being authentic to those values? And then, prepare for war. It's a bit difficult. You definitely don't want to take that literally. But under prepare for war, you've got the idea of the usual suspects, right? The incumbents, the fast growers or the fast movers, and then maybe the new experimental business models or economies or startups. In this case, kind of playing around with Sweden and Hong Kong. Bottom left, this is where it gets really cool and esoteric. This is what I would call proprietary. Walk the plank. Are you prepared to put yourself out of business? Let's just say it's 5 years into. Now, obviously, we talk about this for startups, but imagine America was out of business, right? Falls from grace. How did it happen? And then there are a few of these scenarios, right? Which is economic collapse, or at least no pent-up demand, civil war. We could be on the verge of civil war, especially with the election coming up in November. And then there's mutiny, this idea of actually now embrace your heresy, embrace your fear, and from those ashes is the phoenix reborn. And here's where we think about almost becoming socialist, scrapping the Electoral College, throwing out the Constitution. What a heresy, what a heretic, and starting again, and even embracing the fact that there is latent and pervasive racism in the country. And don't worry, there's good news, because then on the bottom right, you have the victory lap, the exact opposite. We made it. We became a public country or public company, the equivalent of. We rewrote the Constitution, Constitution 2.0, now with minty fresh bleach. The US lives up to its billing as the shining city on the hill and rescues the world from the global pandemic. And maybe another one is the eradication of talk news or talk radio. That would be a good thing. And then finally, Treasure Map, which is new business models, new approaches. And there are a whole bunch of them. I won't go into them in detail. Maybe I'll discuss them, because some of them are based on entire articles that I've written about rethinking tax, rethinking college, rethinking the 1%. But mobile voting could be a new approach that we desperately need. So that was quick. I hope it wasn't too quick, but I wanted to give you a sense as to how that canvas can work for you, for your brand, for yourself as an individual, but certainly for a country. And so with that said, that's it for me in terms of preamble. I hope it wasn't too much. I do want to just say hello to a couple of other regulars, Steve Garfield and Jan Zlotnik. No doubt they will be in the Zoom room as well. And Jan just said, seeing a country as a brand, marketers saving the system, it helped destroy redemption indeed. Well said, Jan. You're so eloquent, unlike me. So that was quick. That was intense. But hopefully it was a little bit energizing, hopefully not too controversial. Would love to hear your thoughts. You can either comment below, or otherwise maybe contact me. Let me know what you think. As I said, I'd love to see yours. But with that said, we are going to move and we're going to reveal the man behind the cartoon. So welcome, Mr. Tom Fishburne, the Marketoonist.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
You are definitely more good looking in real life than you are in cartoon.
I appreciate that. Less watercolor stains on my face.
In caricature. So I'm so happy that you're on the show, because I think that cartoons play such an amazing role. And when we think about satire, I mean, throughout the ages, there's been the best and the worst, right? There's been propaganda from Nazi Germany, and then there's of course been political satire and commentary that really, in a way, without many words, kind of captures what everybody's thinking in the spirit. I'm sure you probably see it the same way.
I do. I love the medium of cartoons. I've always been a big fan. I think it's, I don't know, a sense of humor is one of the most innate things that we have, and cartoons are such a efficient way to communicate using words and pictures that, I love looking through history and seeing how cartoons have been used in various places. But it's a medium that's very close to my heart, and it's fun. I feel lucky that I get to do that every day.
Well, I'd like to go back into your history, and if you wouldn't mind, tell everyone a little bit about your background. And how you came to this world.
Yeah, it's kind of a serendipitous journey. So I grew up as a kid who always just loved cartoons. I had a couple big favorites, Far Side, Gary Larson, obviously. And as I got older, I would sometimes dream about maybe I could do this for a living, but I just couldn't see any way to get there. And I ended up putting it aside, not really thinking about it, and going into marketing. And I found myself in business school, weirdly enough. And we had a student newspaper for the business school. And a friend of mine was the editor and was constantly trying to get people to submit anything to the paper. And I happened to mention to him in passing, I always wanted to be a cartoonist when I was a kid. And he said, well, you should do something for our paper. And he wouldn't kind of let it go. And eventually I submitted something, and that's what really hooked me. It's weird. It was October of 2000, so I'm coming up on 20 years. of basically drawing a cartoon, at least one cartoon a week. So for the 2 years I was in business school, I had a cartoon about student life, and then I went to go work at General Mills. I realized that some of the same things that I felt in business school, where we had a lot of, inside jokes with the people that I worked with, I thought could be fun humor to mine. And I started a weekly cartoon about marketing. And so coming up on 18 years of that. Initially, I just sent it out to a couple of friends, and then one thing kind of led to another. More people started following it, and eventually it started to grow to now a few 100,000 people a week who get it. And initially it was a hobby, and eventually, 10 years ago, became something that I started doing full time.
So we'll talk about the the business model and the fact that there is business, that this isn't just a glorified hobby for you, because I know that you do it full time. And actually, because I ended up buying a cartoon from you, so I know about some of the business model. But obviously you could draw, you can draw. But now I see, I didn't realize it before, but it was so obvious to me, the inspiration and the connection to the Far Side. It's a similar style.
Thank you. Well, I love his work. There are a lot of cartoonists I admire, and I've heard other cartoonists who got started by kind of emulating their heroes. And it was sort of like this Frankenstein approach that you start emulating your heroes and eventually the stitches disappear and it becomes your own style. So Far Side was definitely one of them, but there were a lot of others. Big fan of, Calvin and Hobbes, big fan of New Yorker cartoons, big fan of Shel Silverstein. Over time, I kind of just, I just fall in love with cartoons and different ways that different people communicate. So that's been, fun for me. And now that I get to do it all full time, I get to reread a lot of those old cartoons and count it as research, which is nice.
So, one of the interesting things is I started CoronaTV when the world went to hell. And but I realized that I'm living a live case study. So, in a way, my case study is built and predicated on an assumption that CoronaTV will stick around, will grow, and will turn into something hopefully of substance. But the reason I bring that up is because I'm excited to be able to go back at some point and look at episode number 1, which I think was just me being on Facebook Live.
Right.
And from there it came Zoom, and then and so I thought would be nice to go back and look at some of your most interesting cartoons. And of course, that was my preamble and my setup to look at the first one you ever did. And that's what we have on the screen at the moment. And I've got a whole bunch of yours, which you very kindly shared with me. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your very, they say you never forget the first.
Yes, and it's funny because at that point I had been drawing cartoons for about 2 years, but there were all these business school cartoons, and I thought, I have this luxury of having a school newspaper. But once I graduate, it's over. And then I arrived at General Mills and realized, we're all going through this shared experience together, and maybe there's potential there. So yeah, I drew this cartoon about the 8 types of brand managers, just sort of imagining. That one was actually inspired by Matt Groening, who was the creator of The Simpsons. But before that, he had this cartoon called Life in Hell, and a whole great hysterical series of books. And one of his books was about school in hell, and he had these different types of students that he was with. And I was kind of thinking about that, and I thought about this environment at General Mills where there are 35 associate brand managers or marketing managers who all started at the same time as me. And I thought it'd be fun to characterize them the same way. So I drew this cartoon and I sent it out to my class basically at General Mills and said, I've been drawing this cartoon for 2 years in business school. I'm going to start this marketing cartoon. If you're interested, here's a way to sign up to get on my email list. And that's how it all started. I never did any sort of marketing of it beyond that very first email blast to 35 of my coworkers, and everything has kind of grown from there. So it's fun to relook at this and see that it kind of resonated with that group. And then over time, I started to see people pop up from different companies and then different countries. And then it's grown to what it is today, but it's very serendipitous. I certainly never started it thinking it would become a business or anything that I would do full time. It was just something that I love to do.
I was kind of expecting the story, and then I got fired from General Mills after they all saw that and realized. and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I guess I would be, I'm trying to work out, I've narrowed it down to 3, which is the masochist, the artist, and the consumer advocate.
Yeah.
I don't know if you force me to pick one, which one I'd be. Maybe people watching can determine. Tell me which one I would be, guys that are watching right now, or which one you are. But yeah, I love that one.
Well, and right after that, I should say somebody printed out the cartoon and erased the names and then wrote people's actual names on who in our class they thought fit each different personality, which was kind of fun. And of course, to your other point, I think all of my coworkers thought that at some point I would be fired for this. But the weird story there is, after doing this for about a year or so, I got a call from the administrator for the chief marketing officer asking me to come in for a meeting. And I thought this was going to be to basically muzzle me, to tell me to stop it. But when I got to have this one-on-one time with the chief marketing officer, what he said was, "I'm so glad you're doing this, keep it going." And I realized sometimes in big companies, we can be so risk adverse and so nervous of ruffling feathers, but actually it ended up helping my career far more than hurting it over time, just to have a place to kind of speak my truth and call things as I saw it.
That's a beautiful story. And look, also, if I'm, somebody said to me the other day, they said, "Joseph, you're so kind on Corona TV to your guests," and I'm like, "Yeah, I am, because they deserve it." But I almost realize that this has become an interesting byproduct. This is about optimism and it's about showcasing talent. And so my many compliments I will shower you with, but one of them is, there's that old saying that says, you tell somebody to go to hell and they look forward to the journey. But you've got that beautiful ability, to kind of expose that truth or present the truth. But you do it in I think a safe and a warm way, right? Like the artist, group thinking and always late to meetings. I mean, it's, so much of comedy is built on and based on truth.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've never been one to think of myself at least having a poison pen, partly because, everything that I'm making fun of in a cartoon, I'm also making fun of myself. I've been, every single foible I'm exploiting and making fun of in the cartoons is one that I share. And so it is a shared experience. So I've always gone at it with this sense of just trying to learn and laugh at ourselves. It's laughing at ourselves rather than laughing at anyone individually. At least that's how I thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, my interpretation of that, which is, we always want people to laugh with us as opposed to at us. Sure, but I'd rather someone laughs at me than doesn't laugh at all or cries.
Sure.
And so they're different stages. So we'll move on. But the one thing I also wanted to call out is it's also interesting when you look at your first one, how each character was completely different. And they didn't look like they were part of a family, and also it's all in black and white.
Yeah.
So suddenly you segue to the style that I think even the logo and the kind of the identity. This is January 2014, and I asked you to share with me your most popular cartoon, if not of all time, but certainly one of your most popular ones. And this is what you sent me.
Yeah, and that one was partly, and it is funny to me too to see the different over time. I never really noticed how my style evolves if I looked from one to the next, but over time, it's fun to look back and see, yeah, it is kind of morphing. And I find that true with a lot of my favorite cartoonists too. If you ever look at, the very earliest Peanuts cartoons, Charles Schulz is such an institution, but his very earliest cartoons, Snoopy looked different, he looked like a very different character than he did later in the cartoon series. So yeah, this one was a particularly fun one for me because it was, I drew this cartoon soon after Google announced that it was going to be acquiring Nest, and everybody was starting to talk about the Internet of Things, and it was just a confluence of being the right cartoon at the right time, I guess, and also just striking a chord that suddenly that became one of the more widely shared that's ever happened, particularly in a short period of time. And soon after that, the Davos conference was happening, and this cartoon ended up on the main stage there, and some very influential people were sharing it themselves. So that was one of those moments where I felt like it kind of tapped into a broader zeitgeist, because usually I think of my cartoons primarily about marketing for marketers. That's sort of my focus, because that's my background. And this one touched a chord much beyond the marketing community, because the idea of the Internet of Things, obviously it touches all of society. So that was kind of a fun kind of moment to tap into something a lot bigger.
And also, I think interesting to see how you know, an idea that is birthed, or a cartoon that is birthed, then kind of gets picked up and almost can snowball by being shown by the right person or on the right stage at the right time. Okay, so then I asked you to send me a couple of controversial ones, more provocative or controversial ones, and you sent me. I'll read them. You sent me two. Don't worry, it's only marketers collecting our personal data so they can create more relevant advertising for us.
Yeah, and this one has a, the peeping Tom in the window, and I picked these two because the idea of obviously personal data, that in and of itself is very controversial. And I find that in my cartoons, I'll often, people see a cartoon and they put a little bit of themselves into the cartoon. We all have our own sort of way of looking at the world, and cartoons are particularly participatory because you have an image and you have words, and then the reader has to kind of put the two together and figure out what makes it funny. So a topic like this, I think is important for all marketers to think about. So sometimes we can be so focused on having the right message to the right person at the right time, that there's an argument to collect as much personal information as possible, and yet obviously that can feel like a peeping Tom sort of moment. So a lot of what I try to do with my cartoons is hold up a mirror so we can see it from that point of view. And this became, popular in marketing circles, but also controversial. It's one of the ones sometimes if I share at certain conferences that are very data heavy, sometimes people feel like it's a bit of a sting. Not that I mean it to, but again, I'm trying to hold up the mirror that we all may be marketers, but we're also all people who are in the world of marketing. And I think sometimes, I don't know if you've seen that famous video from Minority Report where the Tom Cruise character is walking through a futuristic mall and all the ads are talking to him directly. They're doing a retina scan and they're advertising beer and all sorts of other stuff. If you show that clip at a marketing conference, a lot of times marketers will talk about it as this utopian vision of what's possible for the future. But oftentimes when you see that clip in popular media, people are pointing at that scene saying, oh my God, that's a dystopian nightmare. So that's an example where this topic is controversial. And in this first cartoon, I was kind of showing it from the perspective of marketers need to pay attention to what this can feel like for actual end consumers. And then the second one is kind of a slightly flipped point of view on a similar topic.
Yeah, and I love the flip because again, it's like we do coexist as marketers in a bit of a catch-22, right? We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. All right, so now let me go back 1 second to that last one. So that last one ended up becoming controversial with folks who hate all aspects of marketing, and I suddenly this is one of the ones where I ended up feeling like for a short period of time there was sort of a backlash, and with a lot of trolls involved who were writing me directly, sending social media messages to me directly, feeling like I was defending all this cultivation of personal data. And that was another example. They're looking at it from a certain lens, but it got very personal very fast. It made me realize, a lot of these topics, I try to just surface issues. I try to cover multiple sides of it. But when people see one image, they might take it as just, oh, this is person proselytizing for an industry, for instance. Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think, again, that comes back to this idea of there is a lot of hypocrisy in our business. I mean, I remember, in the early days of TiVo, the DVR, advertisers that I was presenting to, or marketers that I was presenting to, that themselves were responsible for billions of dollars of television ad spending, all had TiVos and all admitted to skipping every single commercial. I was like, you SOB hypocrites. All right, so now, then what you did is, and because I think in a way, what we didn't even get into like 9/11, which I didn't even think about before, but if there's time, we'll talk about it. But
I do have a story with that actually. So we do come back to that.
Yeah, so at the start of the year, you kind of like, where were we at? This is pre-COVID, right? And you put a bunch of cartoons together that kind of really gave us a moment in time snapshot with respect to where we were, starting off with, with the marketing dashboard. So you want to talk briefly about this one?
Yeah, so I've often thought of my cartoons as a form of a diary of sorts, because I've drawn a cartoon every week for the last almost 18 years, and these were just a few selected from the last 6 months or so. So yeah, obviously the shift to data-driven marketing is one of the major shifts we've seen recently. But I feel like so much of the focus can be on collecting as much data as possible, not necessarily the most insightful or meaningful data. And so this is sort of a mock dashboard, so mimicking a lot of dashboards that marketers have access to, but sort of as if it's the reality behind the numbers here, vanity metrics that have nothing to do with sales, that type of thing. And so I was kind of mocking the actual truth behind the numbers.
And this is actually one of my favorite cartoons that you've ever done, because it actually affects me, and it lives, it's my world, right? I wrote a book called Life After the 30-Second Spot. And people always said, oh, you wrote Death of the 30-Second Spot. I said, no, I didn't write. I said life after, so it's easy in a way to fall into, and I'm sure that I've, done it as well. So you've got TV is dead, retail is dead, segmentation is dead, the CMO is dead, brand loyalty is dead, positioning is dead. What about apocalyptic marketing predictions? Oh, they'll be around forever. I think this is actually now, this cartoon has almost soured me. Like when I look at all these predictions at the end of the year, I don't even make them anymore, because this is why, right?
Yeah, and that's the time of year that I wrote it, because I was just seeing one prediction after another.
All right, so here's one more.
Yeah, this Trojan horse, careful, the last content was full of marketing. And obviously this is one close to my heart, because a lot of my business model with cartoons, I help brands basically create custom cartoons they can use as content marketing primarily. And so I'm kind of making a commentary on how when we're creating something like content, like anything that brands create for people to want to read, so often we can forget about the audience. And if we stuff it too full of self-serving marketing, it's just, it can feel like a bait and switch. And that was just a commentary on that.
You probably could have replaced the word marketing with another word, right? The last content was full of ...
Yep.
And so, one of the things that I think is interesting, going to your business and business model is you have your newsletter, you send out, your free cartoons. But of course, if people want to use them in a book or reprint them, there's licensing, etc. But you also get a lot of commissions and a lot of custom, kind of custom briefs. And I think the next set, there are actually 4 of them that you produce. Maybe set it up and then talk a little bit about this sequence.
Sure. So I've had my cartoons as a regular feature of Marketing Week in the UK since 2008 or so, when I lived over there. And they asked me at their 40th anniversary if I would just create a cartoon celebrating 40 years of marketing. So I ended up creating one cartoon with 4 separate panels, and each of these panels is on a different slide. And it kind of, it represents a little bit, from the 80s. We'll always have a captive audience on cable TV, and shoulder pads will never go out of style. To the 90s, we need to add .com to our brand, and banner ad click-through rates will always be above 40%. To the 2000s, we need to shift everything to digital, and consumers will always want to be our friends on Facebook. To the 2010s, consumers want highly targeted advertising based on their personal data, also VR, AI, and blockchain. And
and you left out chatbots, but anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a fun exercise for me to think about. The 80s predated my work history, but I was a part of the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, and the idea that the more things change, the more things stay the same. Marketing is always evolving, and it's important to stay up to date. But there's some constant truths, and there's some similarities. Every one of these cartoon panels, people are kind of standing in the same place, and they're interacting in similar ways, but yet they're doing it slightly differently. And it made me, I was reminded of this cartoon, obviously, because now we're in the 2020s. So a new decade, and who could have predicted that just a couple of months into this decade, we already have such a massive reckoning of sorts that we're all reacting to. And so it made me that particular project I've been thinking a lot about lately, because we you're working in a certain environment wherever you're working in marketing, and who knows what the future holds, but you're kind of dealing with today's reality, and it's a fun moment for me as a cartoonist, just as somebody trying to chronicle that as I go.
Right, and Bob Farnham said you always share interesting perspectives. But then, of course, what happens is, by the way, I'm just shocked to find out that shoulder pads went out of style. I mean, who knew? But
they'll come back again. All these trends come back again.
We can only hope. We can only hope. But then, of course, everything changes, and good old COVID-19, not good old COVID-19, hits, and I think Steve Garfield, by the way, just said he's subscribed. So there you go. You've got one new customer, at least one. But then COVID-19 hits, and I think you captured this so eloquently, and I think we all recognize that this is exactly what has happened right now. That it's not the chief marketing officer, it's not the CMO, it's not the CEO, it's not the COO or CFO responsible for digital transformation. It's the COVID-19 that was.
Yes, that's right. This actually, it's funny. This is now becoming one of the more widely shared cartoons I've ever done, if I look at it from those analytics. And I'm getting a lot of personal notes about it. I'm seeing it licensed and popping up all over the place. I think because this is a global shared experience, and it feels like getting hit by a wrecking ball. And it definitely comes out of something I identify with. And it's been really nice to see people respond positively to this image as a capture of what we're doing. And also, it's the only cartoon where I've specifically mentioned, COVID-19 in the cartoon. I've been thinking a lot about the role of humor in times like this, and the role of humor in any kind of difficult time. I actually think it's more important time for humor than any time. And I've been encouraged that people are finding this as a useful way to talk about something that's hard to talk about. And so that's been really an interesting one. I've really enjoyed seeing how people are using that particular cartoon as they're having conversations with their teams or businesses or conferences. It's been fun to see kind of an image that I created kind of end up in the world like that.
Yeah, I'm just, and maybe you've done one already, but if you haven't, just please let me know when you do. If you've done one, this may be a little bit too close to the bone, but with respect to all of those, we're all in this together, and we've got your back, and in these unprecedented times. I don't know if you've done one, but if you have, please send it to me, and if you haven't, please do one.
I have a rough sketch for Monday, actually. It's funny you say that.
Can you dedicate that to me, please?
I have, yeah. I'm still working out the details of how I'm going to communicate that, but that is my next cartoon, and it's partly inspired by. There's a guy who made a kind of a stitched together 3-minute video of excerpts from all the COVID-19 ads out there. You've probably seen
the one I showed. Yeah, that's the one I showed.
So funny. And so yeah, that's inspired the next cartoon that you'll see on Monday.
Yeah, if I may give some direction, no. But I think it's almost like it's interesting because it's an indictment, right? It's an indictment on marketers and brands, and and there's that old saying, right? Once is witty, twice is shitty. But is it possible that a creative director or copywriter sat down and wrote the script and didn't, in an exam, look to the left and look to the right to see, and copy from the person next door? Yes, it is possible, but isn't it ironic that they all came out with almost virtually the same script? So it's almost like suddenly I see like trying to understand your process, the humor in that. Like I can be as a commentator angry or that's my brand. My brand is to chastise. Your brand is to poke a little bit of fun, but not do it in such a harmful way. Is to say, he cheated from me. No, he cheated from me. No, he cheated from me. That's It's like I was first. No, I was first. No, I was first.
Well, I think that it's a reflection, really, of I don't know, the moment that we're in. there have been so many articles published and other forms of advice about, here's how your brand should sound in this time. And it's all one size fits all. It's all, you need to sound this way, you need to sound that way. And all the brands are reading from the same playbook. So to me, it's not a surprise that they all sound alike. But I think it's a reflection of, there's a little bit of a risk in assuming that a one size fits all playbook will necessarily, fit your brand. And as a result, it's a sea of sameness, which is happens a lot in marketing in a lot of respects. It's easy to play it safe by fitting alongside what everybody else is doing. But obviously, you're not going to be very kind of memorable, and you're not going to say anything particularly interesting. It just becomes wallpaper.
Right, and that's exactly, part of the essence, the authenticity or the lack thereof, right? Some brand we apparently gave an email address to 3 or 4 years ago wants us to know they're here for us in this difficult, unprecedented time. Suddenly brands figured out how to play the empathy card.
Yeah.
And then I think I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but otherwise, this is, I think, the last one we have to share.
Yeah.
All that's in here is a memo to cut our marketing budget.
And that's another example. I often find the humor for me starts with some sort of a pain point that the audience experiences, and I experience personally, and that humor often comes from pain points. I like to find humorous ways to represent those as a way for us to be able to talk about things that can be kind of hard and difficult. And I think that's also, I've been thinking a lot about the role, as I mentioned, the role of humor in a time like this, and I find it. I think that you've mentioned empathy a couple of times. I think that humor is one of the best ways to show and share empathy, and I feel like it'll be really interesting. I'm watching for examples of how brands are finding ways to use humor in a time like this to not make light of the situation, but to find shared connection with everybody over kind of just living as a human today. And you contrast that 3-minute reel of all those ads that sound alike with the same, somber piano music in the background. Contrast that with, Burger King just announced, released an ad this week that has, a kind of a slightly humorous take about how staying home, they're celebrating the couch patriot is the word they're using. And I feel that that's kind of a nice, clever use of language, and it's a little bit of humor about the fact that we're all inside. And, it still has an important message, but it's done with a little bit of levity. And so I'm interested in looking at brands that can find a way to use humor in a way that's truthful to them.
Because I'm trying to say that one 3 times fast. Couch patriot.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, couch patriot.
But I mean, not only is what you say completely, universally true, right? The power of humor, but comedians have always had to figure out that balance. Whether it was Howard Stern continuing to broadcast during 9/11. Or talk show hosts wondering, or SNL wondering when they could come back and when it was okay to go there. I know you said you had a story about 9/11, and I wanted to make sure that you shared that with us before we wind up.
Yeah, that one kind of so there are two parts of the story. So in 9/11, I was in business school. I was drawing this weekly cartoon for students, and when 9/11 happened. The afternoon of 9/11, the editor of the student paper, sent me a note asking if I would draw a cartoon for a special edition on, September 12th. And I thought, what could I possibly draw in a moment like that? And I ended up creating an image. It didn't use humor, but it was about the shared connection. I drew this cartoon that had a central building on campus, and we were a very international school. We were 30% international, and we were all going through this shared experience together. So I drew this central building on campus that had all of these international flags at half-mast, kind of showing that we were all sort of grieving and going through this experience together. And the next day, the paper ran that as the principal image on the cover of the paper, because it explained something in pictures that was very hard to say in words. And obviously there's not humor in that, but for me as a cartoonist, it really solidified my interest in this way of communicating with people in this shared experience. But I have since studied what other kind of brands, what other cartoonists did around that time, and was really struck by the New Yorker. The New Yorker, has cartoons every issue. It's one of the most popular features of the magazine. Right after September 11th, they ran an issue, without cartoons. But then it became, what's the next thing that they do? And the first cartoon that they published was a Leo Cullum cartoon that had two people at a bar, and this woman, referring to this guy she's talking to and saying, "I never thought I would laugh again. And then I saw your jacket." And the guy has this really ridiculous car salesman-like jacket. And it was a reminder to me that that actually coming out of difficult situations is when we need more humor than ever. And finding ways to connect over shared experiences and humors can be a real positive thing to do. So I'm a big believer in it. I love one of the examples I've been studying lately is the cartoonist Bill Maudlin, who won the Pulitzer Prize for drawing cartoons literally from the trenches of World War II. And I feel like there's a model there for laughing in the trenches, finding humor in the trenches that can be really useful in a time like this. The memes that we all have seen about the time that we're in. There's a reason for that, because we need some release mechanism through laughter. And I think it's an interesting reflection point for brands and marketers to think about. Are there places where we can find levity? Again, not making light of anything happening with COVID, but just finding shared humor in this situation that we're all in together.
I think it's great. It reminded me of that old joke, which is what's the absolute key to perfect timing.
Yeah.
So clearly bad timing on my part, but timing, subtlety, empathy, care, context, and there is a sensitivity. That's the word that I kind of take away. Jan was actually just commenting on the New Yorker. If you want to hear the answer to the question, because Tom's not going to answer it now, come on into the Zoom room. We are going to be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. All you got to do is go to bits.ly/CoronaTV after show, and we will be there for about 15 minutes or so. Small amount of time today, because as usual, I went over, because as usual, I had a really interesting guest who, as usual, had very interesting things to say. So, Tom, I want to thank you for coming in. At the bottom of the screen, you can find out how you can engage with Tom, how you can find out more about his work. Go to the Marketoonist.com. You can sign up for his newsletter, and you can order his book, which, I have a copy of. Your ad ignored here. Tom, just some final thoughts or words, anything you want to promote or talk about, or just final words to the audience.
I would just say, this is such a useful time to kind of experiment. I shifted gears from Marketoonist being a hobby to something that I get to do as a business out of 2008, 2009. That was really when I started experimenting the most. And so I would just encourage everyone, as you think about where we are right now, it's a good time to do a self-assessment on where you are in your career, in your life, and a good time to experiment with things. You never know what's going to come out of this.
Well, thank you so much for coming in, Tom.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to have this conversation.
Yeah, it was really great to meet him. Tom is going to be moving over to our Zoom room at the moment. And as for you guys, I hope you have a wonderful Friday, a magnificent Saturday. And I will be back on Sunday with Jonathan and I from South Africa. And you will absolutely love the show on Sunday, like you loved the show, no doubt, today. So take care, everyone. And I will see you soon. Bye-bye.